The sun was sinking behind the red dust hills when Evan Callahan staggered through the wooden gate of the little homestead. His shirt was half-tucked, boots dragging, hair a mess from whatever Duke Ramsay had dared him to do that afternoon. He was humming, off-key and too loud, blissfully unaware of the storm waiting for him. It struck fast. An arm solid as a fence post hooked around his neck from behind. Another hand shot forward, fisting the waistband of his pants and yanking him so hard his feet almost left the ground. "Marlene! Wait! That's Hay!" Marlene Whitford spun him around like he weighed nothing. Her hair flew wild around her face, her cheeks flushed bright, her jaw tight with fury. She looked like she could wrestle a bull and win. Evan lifted his hands high. "I can explain." "No, you can't." She gave one last sharp tug at his waistband before dropping him. Evan stumbled backward, grabbing his middle with a wounded squeak. Two neighbors walking by slowed down, nodded politely, and kept going. Dust Creek had seen stranger things. But for Evan Callahan, 23, handsome, reckless, this felt like the moment judgment finally arrived in the form of his plus-size, terrifyingly strong new wife. Yet beneath her anger, something flickered in her eyes. Something that looked less like rage, more like hurt. He didn't know why. He was about to. Dust Creek had always talked about the Callahans and the Whitfords as if their histories were braided together. Land, cattle, droughts, harvest seasons, everything tied the families close. Evan and Marlene grew up side by side. And side by side, they argued about everything. To outsiders, they were a walking thundercloud. To Marlene, secretly, once upon a time it had been something else. She had been 12 when she first liked him. Not the chaos, not the troublemaking, just Evan. The boy who defended her once when a neighbor kid called her big as a wagon. The boy who tossed her a wildflower and muttered, "It reminded me of you." Tough. She never forgot that. But as she grew older and rounder, she hid every soft feeling under layers of sarcasm and work. Evan remained oblivious, living like the world would bend before him. Their parents, convinced Marlene would steady him and he would soften her, revived an old promise. A future wedding agreed upon when they were still children. "Marry her," June Callahan had pleaded. "She's good for you, Evan. You're strong enough for both of you," Raymond Whitford told Marlene. Neither wanted to disappoint the people who raised them. Neither dared be the first to refuse. And so, a dusty promise turned into a marriage they weren't ready for. The wedding lasted 12 minutes. The preacher cleared his throat. "You may kiss the bride." "We're good," Marlene cut in. "Totally fine," Evan echoed. Awkward coughs. Forced applause. Two miserable newlyweds signed their names and avoided each other's eyes. By sundown, they were at the cabin Thomas Callahan gifted them, a small house with a good roof, a worn porch, a split-rail fence, and 2 bedrooms. Marlene took the west room. Evan took the east. A mutual, silent relief. Marlene fell into the rhythm of building a home. Chopping vegetables, ironing linens, sweeping floors, feeding chickens. She worked with the sturdy calm of someone who had held her family together since girlhood. Evan tried helping. He broke a plate, dropped a bucket, hung his jacket on the frying pan hooks. "Just go stand somewhere," Marlene muttered. Life settled into a strange orbit. Marlene up before dawn. Evan wandering out shirtless past noon, hair sticking up, kicking dust off his boots like he was allergic to responsibility. Neighbors whispered, "They're married?" They looked like 2 people trapped in the same storm. They weren't partners. Not yet. Just 2 young souls bound by a promise they didn't know how to live with. But Dust Creek had a way of pushing two stubborn people into each other's paths, and the crash was coming soon. Life in the little cabin settled into something halfway between a marriage and a fistfight. Every morning, Marlene opened the windows, swept the porch, chopped vegetables, and kneaded dough like she had been running households since birth. She moved with purpose, back straight, sleeves rolled, hair pinned tight. Every morning, Evan created a disaster. One day, he tried to make coffee and somehow started a small flour explosion that left the kitchen looking like a snowstorm hit it. Another day, he rode his gelding straight past the laundry line, sending Marlene's freshly washed dresses flying into the dirt. Evan Callahan. It was the wind. The horse doesn't control your brain. Dust Creek got used to seeing Evan sprinting across the yard with Marlene behind him, swinging a wooden spoon like a sheriff chasing an outlaw. But in between the chaos, something softer kept slipping through. When Marlene lifted a heavy hay bale with one arm, Evan caught himself staring not in shock, but admiration. When Evan made her laugh once by tripping over his own boot, her smile flickered like sunlight he hadn't seen in years. They weren't friends. They weren't lovers. But the air between them was starting to spark in ways neither understood. It happened on a quiet afternoon. Evan stood outside the cabin, overhearing Marlene talking to her mother through the window. "I'm trying, Mama. But I don't think he'll ever grow up. He's still a boy. I can't trust him with anything important." The words hit harder than any fist. He froze, shoulders slowly slumping. So. That was what she thought of him. A child. Useless. A burden tied to her life. He backed away from the wall, stung, throat tight. And that was when Duke Ramsey trotted up on his horse. "Evenin', Evan. Heard wife of yours holds the purse strings tight. You sure you didn't marry your mama?" Evan's jaw clenched. Duke smirked. "Come on. One drink. Show 'em you're still your own man." For a moment, Evan hesitated. Truly hesitated. Then the mix of embarrassment, pride, and heartbreak twisted inside him. He reached into the cabin, opened the little wooden money box Marlene kept so carefully organized, and took a handful of bills and coins. He told himself it wasn't wrong. He told himself it was his money, too. He told himself he'd replace it. But when he stepped outside with the stolen money in his fist, the shame crawled up his spine. He didn't go far. Just across the yard, where he sat on the fence rail, thinking, breathing, regretting. Something in him whispered, "Go put it back." But pride held him still. And inside the cabin, the first real fracture in their fragile marriage had already begun. Marlene noticed it the moment she stepped into the cabin. The wooden money box on the shelf, her pride, her careful planning, 10 years of saving every spare coin was slightly crooked. The lid wasn't closed all the way. A tiny corner of the cloth pouch peeked out like a wound. Her chest tightened. "No. No, please," she whispered. She opened it. Empty. Not completely just empty in the way that matters. The neat stacks of bills were gone. The coins she sorted by stubborn habit. Scattered. Only a few fell into her palm with a hollow clink. For a long second she just stood there, frozen, throat burning. Then she sank to her knees. She didn't scream. She didn't run after him. She didn't storm through the yard like she usually did. Marlene simply bowed her head, shoulders shaking silently, and began gathering the scattered coins with trembling fingers, one by one, as if each tiny piece of metal was a piece of her hope she was trying to glue back together. Her breath hitched. A tear fell on a copper penny. Another one rolled onto the floorboards. This money wasn't just money. It was her life's effort, her parents' trust, their shared future. Now it was gone. Because he didn't think she'd care, Evan returned to the cabin door with the stolen money still in his pocket. He wasn't drunk. Not yet. Just ashamed. And too proud to undo it. He pushed the door half open and froze. Marlene sat on the floor, hair falling over her face, big shoulders trembling as she gathered coins into her skirt. Not yelling. Not chasing. Not swinging a spoon. Just quietly breaking. A sharp pain stabbed through his chest. He had seen Marlene angry, fierce, annoyed, sarcastic. But he had never seen her look small. He stepped back, almost tripping over himself. He couldn't breathe. What have I done? The stolen money suddenly felt heavy in his pocket like bricks, like guilt. He pressed a hand to the fabric as if it might burn through. He wanted to step in, tell her he'd put it back, that he was sorry. But the look on her face hurt, disappointment, exhaustion made him feel like a boy again. A foolish, stupid boy who ruined everything he touched. So he didn't step inside. He didn't say a word. He just stood there in the doorway, swallowed by the shadows, watching the woman he married fall apart because of him. And for the first time in his life, shame hurt more than any beating she could have given him. The next morning, Evan woke early. Not because he felt responsible, not because he suddenly understood adulthood, but because the image of Marlene kneeling on the floor replayed in his mind over and over, stabbing at him like a spur to the ribs. He slipped out of bed quietly, stepped outside, and started working. He fixed the fence he broke last week. He chopped wood, real wood, not the 2 sticks he pretended to split before. He hauled water from the pump, fed the chickens, swept the porch, and put things back where Marlene liked them. He didn't do it well, but he did it. When Marlene walked out holding a basket of laundry, she stopped cold. Evan stood there, shirtless, sweaty, breathless, axe in one hand like a man caught committing a crime. She narrowed her eyes. What? Exactly. Are you doing? Evan swallowed. Stuff. Stuff. Yeah. Ranch stuff. He wiped his brow with the back of his wrist, trying to look casual and failing miserably. Marlene didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened just a flicker. She didn't thank him. She didn't praise him. But she didn't scold him either. And for Evan, that tiny mercy felt bigger than any reward. Because change didn't start with grand declarations. It started with shame. Then effort. Then a single, quiet morning where a foolish young man tried, for once, to make things right. For 3 days, Evan tried. Not gracefully. Not perfectly. But honestly, he fixed the hinge on the chicken coop he'd broken last week. He hauled water without complaining. He even swept the porch without knocking anything over, a miracle Dust Creek would take years to recover from. Marlene noticed. Of course she noticed. She didn't praise him. Marlene didn't hand out trophies for basic decency, but the sharp edge in her voice dulled. The way she looked at him shifted, even if barely. Once, he caught her watching him through the kitchen window while he stacked firewood. She didn't scowl. She didn't turn away fast. It was something. And for a foolish young man trying to be better, that tiny something felt huge. Then the crack happened. Evan was walking toward the barn when he heard voices from the cabin, Marlene's and her mother's. He didn't mean to listen. He only stopped because he heard his name. Do you think he's really changing? Helen Whitford asked gently. A long silence. Too long. Then Marlene's soft, tired voice. I want to believe he is, Mama. But I don't. Not yet. Evan is still a boy. I can't trust him with anything important. Something inside Evan went still. Not angry. Not broken. Just hollow. A boy. Untrustworthy. Not worthy of responsibility. He stared at the porch boards as the words sank deep. All the work he'd done 3 small days of trying felt ridiculous. A dog doing tricks. A child wanting approval he'd never earn. He stepped back, dragging in a breath that didn't feel full. Perfect timing. Duke Ramsay trotted up on his horse. Well, Duke smirked. If it ain't the little husband. Heard your wife's the one running the place. You sure you didn't marry your mama? Evan's jaw clenched. Duke grinned wider. Come on. 1 drink. Show the world you ain't on a leash. Evan should have walked away. Should have said no. But hurt pride has a way of dragging a man by the throat. So he followed Duke, not because he wanted to drink, but because the alternative was standing outside that window, listening to Marlene say he wasn't worth believing in. Night settled over Dust Creek. The lanterns along Main Street glowed amber as Evan leaned against the bar, a full drink untouched in front of him. Duke rambled about women, money, freedom. Evan barely heard a word. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't even drinking. He was running from her words, from his shame, from himself. When he finally walked home under the cold night breeze, guilt followed him like a shadow tied to his boots. The cabin porch light was still burning. Marlene sat beside it, shoulders shaking, her hands covering her face. Evan's heart dropped. He had seen her mad. He had seen her annoyed. But he had never seen her cry. Marlene, he whispered. She looked up. Her eyes were red, raw, devastated. Where were you? She breathed. Not shouted. Pleaded. Where were you? Evan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He'd only been gone a few hours, right? That couldn't be enough, too. But Marlene was already standing, her voice breaking in a way that sliced him deeper than any insult she'd ever thrown. While you were out drinking, she choked on the words, your father. Collapsed. The earth under Evan's feet stopped moving. What? His voice cracked. No, he was fine this morning. She shook her head. It was a stroke. They don't know if he'll make it. He kept asking for you. Evan swayed, gripping the porch railing. His father. The strongest man he knew. The man who never missed a sunrise. The man who thought Evan would take over the ranch someday. And Evan hadn't been there. He had been in a saloon, drowning in pride and hurt. Come on, Marlene said, snatching his coat and shoving it into his hands. Her voice steadied because she had to be strong when he couldn't. We don't have time. Move. For once, Evan didn't argue. He didn't joke. He didn't stumble. He followed her because his legs had forgotten how to think for themselves, and because the world had just taught him the most brutal lesson of his life. Some mistakes don't wait. Some regrets don't forgive. Thomas Callahan lay in the big bed at the main house, face ashen, breathing shallow. The doctor murmured things Evan barely understood. Stroke, high stress, weakened heart, financial strain too heavy for a man his age. June Callahan sat at her husband's side, clasping his limp hand. When Evan entered, she looked up with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Oh, Evan, she whispered, voice trembling. Where were you, son? He couldn't answer. He couldn't even lift his head. But Thomas's eyelids fluttered open at the sound of his boy's voice. Pa? Evan whispered, kneeling beside the bed. I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His father's lips moved. Ranch. Needs you. A pause. A breath. Grow up, son. The words weren't harsh. They were a final blessing. A desperate hope. June touched Marlene's arm. Her eyes glistened. Help him, she whispered. Please. He can't do this alone. Marlene nodded once, firm, steady, unshakable. Evan bowed his head beside his father, tears burning. Everything he'd failed at, every childish choice, every selfish moment rose like smoke around him. But Marlene stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. Not to scold, not to drag him, but to hold him steady. We'll fix it, she said softly. We'll take care of the ranch, one step at a time. Evan looked up at her, eyes red, voice fractured. How? I don't even know where to start. Her gaze was unwavering. By showing up, she said, and by not running this time. Something inside him shifted, a quiet, painful, necessary breaking. Because for the first time in his life, he wanted to stay, to fight, to be the man she thought he could become. And the ranch, his father's legacy, his family's home, would give him the chance.